A battered dog's desperate whimper pulls a broken janitor into a dangerous fight, unearthing scars and salvation. Welcome to Pause Verve. Like and share videos with those who need love. November in Toledo, Ohio was a thief of warmth and light, stealing breath from lungs and hope from hearts with its endless grey rain. The city slouched under a sky like smudged charcoal, the kind that pressed down on old neighborhoods, making clapboard houses sag and gutters choke with leaves. Elmwood Avenue was no exception, its cracked sidewalks glistening with oily puddles and streetlights flickering, as if too tired to fight the dusk. At number 417, a peeling green bungalow stood defiant but weary, its iron gate rusted and creaking in the wind, a faded mailbox bearing the name N. Carver. Nathan Carver. 47 years old, lived alone in that house, a man whose body told stories his lips never would. Tall but stooped, his shoulders curved not from age but from years of hauling lumber and swinging hammers, until a fall from a rooftop shattered his right arm and his dreams. Once a skilled carpenter, he now pushed a mop at Lincoln. Middle school, his thick hands cracked and calloused, gripping brooms instead of tools. His flannel shirts were threadbare. His work pants patched his brown coat heavy with the smell of damp wool, his beard graying and uneven framed pale blue eyes that held a quiet grief, too deep for tears. Nathan didn't talk much, didn't go out. Except for work, his neighbors called him reserved, though some whispered odd. He wasn't just tired, he was hollowed out by a past he kept locked behind a door no one could open. His fridge held half a carton of milk, a few slices of bread, and a jar of mustard gone cloudy with age. His gas bill was overdue. His boots let in water, but he got by paycheck to paycheck each day, blurring into the next. That evening the rain had softened to a drizzle, but the air stayed cold, biting at Nathan's knuckles as he dragged a trash bin through the alley behind the school. The narrow path was a mess of chain-link fences and crumbling brick walls, the dumpsters reeking of spoiled lunches and wet cardboard. The security light buzzed overhead, casting jagged shadows that danced with the wind. Nathan moved slowly, his bad arm aching under the bin's weight, his breath fogging in the chill. Then he heard a sound that didn't belong, not the clink of bottles or the patter of rain, but a small broken whimper like a child trying not to cry. He stopped, tilting his head to listen. The sound came again, faint and raw, from behind a dumpster. Cautious, he stepped closer, squinting into the dark, expecting a raccoon or a stray cat rummaging through scraps. But then he saw fur, golden but matted, with blood and filth, a shape barely canine, curled beneath a torn trash bag. It was a golden retriever, or what was left of one, its snout swollen, one eye crusted shut, ribs sharp against its skin, like it had been starved for weeks. The dog tried to shrink away, but could only twitch its body, trembling in the wet grime. Nathan crouched his knees, creaking his breath, catching at the sight of deep gashes on its legs, and a raw ring of torn skin around its neck, as if a wire had been yanked tight for days. "Hey," he whispered, without thinking. "It's okay now." The dog flinched at his voice, its breathing shallow and ragged, one paw scraping weakly against the pavement. It looked at him just for a moment, its one good eye glossy with pain, and something else, a silent plea that wasn't fear, but surrender. Then, as if it had spent its last strength to meet his gaze, the dog's head sank to the ground, its limbs limp, its breath a faint whistle. Nathan stayed there, rain soaking his coat, his heart pounding, not from fear, but from something older, something he couldn't name. He didn't have the money, didn't have the space, didn't have the life for this. His bank account was a negative. Number his kitchen, bare his own body, a patchwork of old injuries. But in that moment, none of it mattered. He slipped off his coat, the damp fabric heavy, and draped it over the dog, lifting it gently into his arms. It was too light, like a hollowed-out shell, its fur cold against his chest. He stood cradling it, the alley silent, except for the rain, a passing car splashing through a puddle down the street. Nathan didn't look up. His boots sloshed through the wet as he carried the dog across the school lot and down Elmwood Avenue, his pants soaked to the knees, his face calm, but his insides cracking open like ice on a frozen pond. Across the street, behind a lace-curtained window, Clara Hensley watched a woman of 72 who wore thick sweaters and kept her porch wind chimes singing despite her grumbles. Widowed for 15 years since her husband died in a factory fire, she lived alone, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She saw Nathan wet and burdened, cradling something alive and broken, and though she couldn't see the dog clearly, she felt it in her. Bones a whisper of grace in the dark. She turned from the window, her lips moving in a quiet prayer, God keep them both. Outside, the rain fell on the house at number 417, creaked under its weight, the cold seeping through its walls. Nathan pushed open his door, the hinges groaning, and laid the dog on a frayed blanket by the radiator, its faint warmth hissing in the silence. He knelt beside it, his hands trembling not from cold, but from the weight of what he'd chosen. Been the dog's scars gleamed under the dim bulb, jagged and cruel, and Nathan knew this wasn't just a rescue. It was a reckoning for both of them, a chance to mend something the world had tried to break. The rain clung to Toledo like a stubborn ghost, its drizzle weaving through the cracked windows of Nathan Carver's bungalow at 417 Elmwood Avenue, casting a damp chill that curled around the bare floorboards. Inside the living room was a study, in scarcity, a sagging couch with springs poking through a single bulb flickering in a chipped lamp, a radiator hissing weakly against the cold. Nathan knelt on the fraying carpet, his bad arm throbbing as he gazed at the golden retriever he'd carried home, its broken body wrapped in his old brown coat. The dog's fur was matted with blood and grime, its ribs sharp under the fabric, its breath a shallow rasp that seemed to apologize for existing. Nathan named it Chance in a whisper, not because it fit, but because it was all the dog had left, a sliver of hope against the odds. He moved slowly, his work-worn hands steady, despite the ache fetching a bowl of warm water and a rag from the kitchen. The dog flinched at his approach, its one good eye darting with fear, its body tensing as if expecting a blow. Easy now, Nathan murmured, his voice low, like he was coaxing a child from a nightmare. He dipped the rag and touched it to Chance's leg, cleaning a gash crusted with dirt. The dog whimpering but too weak to pull away. Each swipe revealed more scars, jagged lines across its flank, a raw circle around its neck like a noose had tried to claim it. Nathan's jaw tightened, his mind slipping unbidden to a memory of himself at 10, hiding in a closet, while his father's voice roared through their old house in Akron. The crack of a belt, the shatter of a bottle his mother's muffled. Sobs, these were the sounds of his childhood, etched into his bones like the scars on Chance. He shook the thought away, focusing on the dog, his hands trembling not from cold but from a rage he hadn't felt in years. He didn't have much, no antiseptic, no bandages, just a half-empty bottle of dish soap and a towel worn thin. He mixed the soap with water and cleaned Chance's wounds as best he could, the dog's whimpers softening to silence as if it sensed his intent. Nathan's fridge was nearly bare, but he found a packet of powdered broth tucked behind a jar of pickles, an emergency stash from leaner days. He boiled water on his stuttering stove, the kettle rattling, and mixed the broth with a handful of oats, stirring until it was a thin gruel. Sitting cross-legged by Chance, he spooned drops into the dog's mouth, its tongue flicking weakly at first, then more eagerly. "Eat, boy," he whispered. "You're still here, you're still fighting." The radiator clunked, the room dim and cold, but Nathan didn't notice his world narrowed to the dog's shallow breaths. He stayed there hours, passing unnoticed, his back aching, his knees stiff, his eyes burning from lack of sleep. Every time he closed them, he saw Chance's pleading gaze from the alley, that look of surrender that wasn't fear, but shame, as if the dog believed it deserved its pain. Nathan understood that feeling too well. His fall from the rooftop 7 years ago hadn't just broken his arm, it had shattered his life. Carpentry was all he'd known, the rhythm of saws and nails, the pride of building something lasting. The injury took his job, his savings, his purpose, leaving him to mop floors at Lincoln Middle School, where children's laughter felt like a language he'd forgotten. He'd lost his wife Emily to cancer 3 years later, her hospital bills swallowing what little he had left. Their son Jacob, only 16, then blamed Nathan for not fighting harder, for not finding a miracle. Jacob left after the funeral, his last words, "A knife, you let her die." Nathan hadn't seen him since, hadn't known how to reach out, hadn't believed he deserved to. Now, as he watched Chance's chest rise and fall, he felt a crack in that old guilt, a stirring of something stubborn and alive. He didn't know how to save a dog, didn't know if he could afford it, didn't know if he was enough, But he knew he couldn't walk away, not from this creature who'd looked at him like he was its last chance. Sometime before dawn, Chance sighed a small sound, almost content, and shifted its head to rest against Nathan's boot. The touch was light, but it landed like a stone in still water rippling through Nathan's chest. He didn't move, didn't breathe, afraid to break the moment. Outside, the rain slowed to a murmur, the street silent, save for the occasional drip from the eaves. Across the street, Clara Hensley stirred in her sleep, her dreams restless with the image of Nathan carrying something broken home. She'd slipped a note under his door earlier, a simple offer of soup or blankets written in her spidery hand, but Nathan hadn't seen it, his eyes fixed on Chance. The dog's breathing steadied its tremors, easing, though its scars gleamed raw under the lamplight. Nathan leaned back against the couch, his flannel shirt damp, his hands stained with broth and blood. He didn't sleep, not really, his mind too full of the dog's pain and his own. But as the first grey light crept through the window, he felt a shift, a quiet promise that this act, this choice to save something fragile, might save him too. Chance stirred, lifting its head to look at him, its eye clearer now, less clouded by fear. Nathan smiled, a rare thing, worn and uneven, and whispered, "You're gonna make it." The house creaked, the radiator hissed, and in that small, battered room too, broken souls began to mend, each holding the other's fragile hope. Morning broke over Toledo with a grudging light, the rain pausing but leaving the air heavy and cold, the sidewalks of Elmwood Avenue slick with mud and fallen leaves. Nathan Carver rose from the floor of his bungalow at 417, his body stiff from a night spent beside Chance, the golden retriever, whose faint breaths had kept him anchored through the dark. The dog lay curled on a blanket by the radiator, its fur less clotted now, but still dull, its scars stark against the golden strands. Nathan's eyes were gritty, his bad arm throbbing, but he felt a quiet resolve, a flicker of purpose he hadn't known in years. He checked Chance's wounds, finding them less weepy, though the dog still flinched at sudden movements, its one good eye tracking him with wary trust. Nathan boiled more water, mixed another batch of broth and oats, and fed Chance drop by drop, the dog's tongue stronger now, its appetite a small victory. His own breakfast was a slice of stale bread smeared with mustard, his stomach knotting not from hunger, but from the weight of what came next. He couldn't keep patching Chance up with dish soap and rags. The dog needed real care, medicine, bandages, maybe even stitches. His bank account was a ghost, barely enough for rent and utilities. His gas shut off twice that year. But Nathan knew the school where he mopped floors. Lincoln Middle School had a medical cabinet in the nurse's office, rarely locked, stocked with basics that might help. He pulled on his damp coat, zipped it against the chill, and glanced at Chance, who lifted its head as if to ask where he was going. "Stay put, boy," Nathan said, his voice soft. "I'll be back." The walk to the school was 3 blocks, the air biting his knuckles, the street quiet except for the squawk of a distant crow. Lincoln Middle School loomed ahead, its brick facade stained by years of weather, its windows fogged with condensation. Nathan slipped in through the side door, his boots squeaking on the linoleum, the halls empty this early save for the hum of a distant vacuum. The nurse's office was down a dim corridor, the cabinet a metal box bolted to the wall, its lock flimsy, enough for a paperclip. Nathan hesitated, his pulse quickening, not because he feared getting caught, but because taking something even for Chance felt like crossing a line he'd never crossed. He nudged the lock open with a rusted clip, his fingers clumsy, and took 2 rolls of gauze, a bottle of antiseptic wash, and a handful of cotton pads, slipping them into his coat. As he turned to leave, a voice called out, "Morning, Mr. Carver." Lena Torres, the art teacher, stood in the doorway of her classroom, her hands streaked with paint, her braids swinging as she smiled. She was in her 30s, warm-skinned, with a laugh that could thaw a room, the only teacher who ever asked Nathan about his day. He nodded, not meeting her eyes, just picking up something. Lena tilted her head, her gaze catching the bulge in his coat. "Everything okay?" she asked, her tone gentle, not prying. Nathan paused, then mumbled, "Yeah, just needed some supplies." She nodded, not pushing, but said, "If you ever need anything, I've got extra soap towels, even old rags from art day. We toss more than we use." Nathan gave a tight smile, thanks, and hurried out, his heart pounding, not from guilt, but from being seen. Back home, he tended to Chance, cleaning the dog's wounds with the antiseptic. The the gauze soft against the raw skin. Chance whimpered, but didn't pull away, its trust growing like a fragile root. Nathan's mind churned. He couldn't keep stealing supplies, couldn't keep guessing at care. Chance needed a vet, someone who knew what those scars meant, how to heal them. He'd heard of a place on Monroe Street, a small clinic called Monroe, Pet Haven, run on donations where people brought strays and battered pets. It was 5 blocks away, too far for Chance to walk in its state. Nathan found an old laundry basket, lined it with a towel, and gently lifted Chance inside the dog's body, light as a sigh. He pushed the basket in a rusted shopping cart, its wheels squealing over the uneven pavement, ignoring the stares of a woman sweeping her stoop. The clinic was a narrow building wedged between a boarded-up diner and a pawn shop. Its sign faded, but the windows warm with light. Inside smelled of disinfectant and kibble, the waiting room crowded with a cat in a carrier and a limping terrier. A young woman stood behind the desk, her chestnut curls tied back, her name tag reading Tessa Quinn. She looked up as Nathan wheeled in, her eyes sharp but kind, flashing with surprise at the cart. "Need help?" she asked, stepping around the desk. Nathan nodded. "He's hurt. Found him behind the school last night." Tessa crouched by the basket, peeling back the towel, her breath catching at Chance's scars. She ran her fingers near the wounds without, touching her face, tightening. "Do you know what happened?" she asked. Nathan shook his head, only that someone tried to break him and almost did. Tessa's eyes darkened, pointing to a circular scar on Chance's leg. "That's from a metal tether, not rope, probably chained for days. And this," she said, tracing the air above the neck wound, "that's a muzzle mark, too tight for too long." Nathan swallowed, his fists clenching. Why would anyone? Tessa stood, her voice steady. "Some people train dogs for control, for fights or shows. Goldens are loyal. They'll endure anything to please." She checked Chance's vitals. Her hands, gentle, gave Nathan a tin of antibiotic cream and said, "We don't charge for rescues, just bring him back in a few days." Nathan nodded, words failing him. Tessa smiled. "He's lucky you found him." Back home, Nathan set Chance by the radiator, the dog's breathing easier, its eye brighter. He found Clara's note on the floor by the door, her offer of soup or blankets, written in careful script, and felt a pang of warmth. Someone else saw Chance, someone cared. The house was still cold, the walls creaking, but it felt less empty now. Nathan sat by Chance, his hand resting near the dog's back, not touching, just there, a promise in the quiet. The Toledo dawn was a reluctant guest creeping through the fog, with a light too weak to warm the sodden streets of Elmwood Avenue, where Nathan Carver's bungalow at number 417 stood like a sentinel against the cold. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp wool and antiseptic. Nathan kneeling by the radiator, where Chance the golden retriever lay on a patched blanket, his scars less raw now, his breathing steadier. But his one good eye still clouded, with a fear that lingered like a bruise. Nathan had barely slept, his body aching from nights on the floor, his mind churning with Tessa Quinn's words from the vet clinic that Chance's wounds weren't random but deliberate, the work of someone who saw a dog as a tool to break or bend. He mixed another bowl of broth and oats, spooning it to Chance, who lapped at it with growing strength, his tail giving a faint twitch, the first sign of something beyond survival. Nathan's own hunger went unanswered, his fridge a barren shelf, but he didn't care, his focus fixed on the dog, whose trust felt like a fragile gift he couldn't afford to lose. He cleaned Chance's wounds with the stolen gauze, his hands steady, despite the guilt that gnawed at him for taking from the school. His thoughts drifted to his past, unbidden and sharper memory of himself at 12, crouching in a shed, while his father's rage tore through their Akron home, the crack of a chair against a wall, his mother's voice pleading for calm. Nathan had learned silence, then learned to make himself small, but the scars of those years were as real as Chance's, etched not in skin, but in the way he flinched at loud voices or sudden moves. He pushed the memory down, humming softly to Chance, a tuneless sound that calmed the dog's trembling. The radiator hissed, the room dim but warming, and Nathan felt a spark of hope that maybe he could be enough for this creature who'd endured so much. Mid-morning brought a knock at the door, sharp and unexpected, Chance lifting his head with a low whine. Nathan opened it to find Clara Hensley, his neighbor of 72, standing on the porch, her wool sweater mismatched with her slippers, her arms cradling a foil-covered dish. "I figured you're feeding that dog scraps." She said, her voice gruff but her eyes soft as she glanced at Chance. "Made some chicken no salt, thought it might do him good." Nathan blinked, surprised by the gesture, his throat tight. "Thank you, Clara." He managed, taking the dish, its warmth seeping through his cracked hands. Clara stepped inside, uninvited, her gaze sweeping the sparse room, landing on Chance, who watched her warily. She'd lost her husband to a factory fire 15 years ago, lived alone since tending her roses and watching the street like a hawk. She knelt by Chance, not too close, and murmured, "Poor thing, you've seen the worst, haven't you?" Nathan watched her, his chest aching at the kindness she offered so freely. They sat by the radiator, Clara sipping tea from a chipped mug Nathan had scrounged up, and she spoke of her husband, how he'd loved dogs, how their old collie had slept by his chair until the end. Nathan listened, his usual silence softening, and when Clara asked about Chance, he told her finding him in the alley, Tessa's diagnosis, the scars that told a story of cruelty. Clara's lips thinned, her fingers tightening on the mug. "Someone ought to pay for that," she said. Nathan nodded, his anger a quiet ember, but he changed the subject, not ready to dwell on it. "You ever have family around?" he asked. Clara shook her head. "Just me now, but I keep busy." Nathan hesitated, then said, "I had a son, Jacob. Haven't seen him. In years, not since his mom passed." The words slipped out raw and unguarded, and Clara didn't pry, just nodded, like she understood loss too well. She left soon after pressing the dish into Nathan's hands with a gruff, "Feed him well, he needs it." Alone again, Nathan fed Chance the chicken, the dog eating eagerly, its tail wagging, now a small miracle that made Nathan's eyes sting. He sat by the radiator watching Chance sleep, his mind turning back to Tessa's words at the clinic. He'd gone back that afternoon, pushing the cart with Chance, bundled inside the streets, slick with mud, the air sharp with coming frost. Tessa met him at Monroe Pet Haven, her curls tied back, her hands quick and gentle as she checked Chance's wounds. "He's stronger," she said, "but these scars, they're from more than one incident." She pointed to a jagged mark on Chance's flank. "This is from a whip or a belt, repeated blows. And the neck wound, it's from a choke chain left on too long, maybe weeks." Nathan's stomach churned. "Why, Goldens, they're not fighters." Tessa's eyes darkened. "They're loyal, smart. They'll take pain to please someone who wants control, maybe. For underground fights or performance trials, where dogs are pushed till they break." She gave Nathan more cream, a few strips of bandage, and said, "Keep him close, he trusts you now." Nathan nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of Chance's past and his own powerlessness. Back home he sat with Chance, the dog curling closer, its head resting on Nathan's knee, a trust that felt like a lifeline. The house creaked, the street outside hushed, but Nathan felt less alone. Clara's chicken, Tessa's care, Chance's quiet strength, weaving a thread of connection he hadn't known he needed. He thought of Jacob out there somewhere, the son he'd failed, and wondered if saving Chance could be a step toward mending what he'd broken. The radiator hummed. Chance sighed in sleep, and Nathan whispered, "We're in this together, boy." The Toledo dusk settled over Elmwood Avenue like a heavy curtain. The November air sharp with the promise of frost, the streetlights casting pale pools on the wet pavement where leaves clung in sodden clumps. Nathan Carver stood outside his bungalow, at number 417, his breath fogging as he adjusted the makeshift leash he'd fashioned from an old belt for Chance, the golden retriever, who limped beside him, his scars fading, but his steps cautious. It had been 10 days since Nathan found Chance behind the school dumpster, 10 days of broth and bandages, of Tessa's quiet expertise at Monroe Pet Haven, of Clara's gruff kindness in the form of unseasoned chicken and a knitted blanket for the dog's basket. Chance was stronger now, his fur regaining a faint sheen, his one good eye less haunted, though he still startled at loud noises, the creak of a gate, the jangle of keys. Nathan took him on short walks each evening, a block or two, to build his strength, the routine a tether for them both, in a world that felt too big and too cruel. Tonight, they turned down a side street past the shuttered bakery, its windows boarded, the air thick with the ghost of burned sugar. The alley behind the old hardware store was narrow, flanked by sagging fences and overflowing bins, the kind of place Nathan usually avoided. But Chance had tugged toward it, nose twitching at some faint scent. Nathan followed, his bad arm aching under his coat. his boots crunching on gravel. Then Chance froze, his body, rigid ears pinned back, a low rasping growl rising from his throat. Not the protective bark Nathan had heard when a stray cat crossed their path, but something deeper, a sound carved from memory. Nathan's pulse quickened, his gaze following Chance's to the far end of the alley, where a green pickup truck sat parked, its paint chipped, its bumper crooked, one headlight patched with tape. A steel crate, rusted and stained, was bolted in the bed, glinting under a flickering street lamp. The driver's door swung open, and a man stepped out, stocky, late 40s, with a balding head and arms thick with tattoos, snakes and skulls twisting under the sleeves of a grease-stained jacket. A cigarette dangled from his lips, its ember glowing as he exhaled a plume of smoke. He stopped when he saw them, his eyes narrowing, then widening with a grin that was all teeth, no warmth. "Well, damn," he said, his voice a gravelly drawl. "Ain't that my dog?" Nathan stepped in front of Chance, his heart hammering, his mouth dry. "You know him?" he asked, his voice steady despite the fear coiling in his gut. The man tossed his cigarette, grinding it under his boot, and took a step closer. "Oh, I know him, spent good money on him, trained him for tracking obedience, even took a few hits to toughen him up, was going to be a star till he ran off." Nathan's grip tightened on the leash, Chance's growl louder now, the dog's body trembling but not retreating. Trained for what Nathan said, his tone flat. The man laughed, a sound like broken glass. "The pit's mostly illegal, sure, but money's money." Nathan's stomach turned, the name coming to him unbidden from a conversation with Tessa at the clinic. Vince Harlow, a shadow in Toledo's underbelly, suspected of running dog fights and cruel training rings, never caught, always slipping through. "You're Vince Harlow," Nathan said, not a question. The man's grin faltered, then returned colder. "You've been asking around, huh? Well, that dog's mine, chipped and registered property by law." Chance pressed against Nathan's leg, his growl a steady hum of fear and defiance. "He's not property." Nathan said, "Not anymore." Vince's eyes darkened, his hand twitching toward his pocket. "You don't get to decide that, janitor. I don't like thieves." Nathan's fear sharpened, memories of his father's fists flashing in his mind. But he stood taller, Chance's presence a weight that grounded him. "You're not getting him back," he said. Vince stepped closer, his breath sour with tobacco. "You think this is a game? He's mine, and I take what's mine." Chance barked, then sharp and high, his front legs staggering as if ready to lunge. But Nathan knelt quickly, his hand gentle on the dog's collar. "Easy, boy." He looked up at Vince, his voice low-leave. "I won't say it again." For a long moment, Vince stared, his jaw working. Then he spit to the side and smirked. "You'll see me again," he said, climbing into his truck, the engine roaring to life as he peeled out the taillights, vanishing into the fog. Nathan stayed frozen, Chance trembling at his side, the alley silent, except for their ragged breaths. He walked home slowly, his boots heavy, Chance limping but alert, his nose brushing Nathan's hand, as if to say, "I'm still here." At number 417, Nathan sank onto the couch, Chance curling by the radiator, the dog's eyes fixed on the door. Nathan's mind raced, Vince's words echoing property by law, the threat not just to Chance, but to the fragile peace they'd built. He needed help, real help. He thought of Tessa, her sharp eyes, her quiet fury at cruelty. She'd know what to do. He'd go to the clinic tomorrow, tell her everything. Maybe she could report Vince, get someone to watch him. The house creaked, the radiator hissed, and Nathan felt the weight of his past pressing in, his father's violence, his failure to save Emily, his son Jacob's absence. But Chance shifted, leaning into his leg, and Nathan's hand rested on the dog's back, not touching the scars. Just there, a promise. Across the street, Clara Hensley watched from her window, her heart heavy with the sight of Nathan and Chance returning. Shaken, she whispered a prayer for their safety, her hands clutching the curtain. Nathan didn't sleep that night, his eyes on Chance, his resolve hardening. He'd fight for this dog, not just to save him, but to prove something to himself, that he could stand up, that he could protect what mattered. The Toledo morning arrived with a brittle chill, the fog curling through Elmwood Avenue, like a living thing wrapping Nathan Carver's bungalow at number 417 in a shroud that dulled the street's edges and muffled its sounds. Inside, Nathan sat on the fraying couch, his hands clasped tight, his eyes red from a sleepless night haunted by Vince Harlow's sneer. and the weight of Chance's trembling body pressed against his leg in the alley. The golden retriever lay by the radiator, his scars less angry now, his fur cleaner, but his one good eye still flickered with unease, as if he sensed the threat lingering beyond the walls. Nathan had fed him Clara's chicken mixed with oats, the sigh. Dog eating eagerly, his tail giving a hesitant wag, a small defiance against the fear that clung to them both. The encounter with Vince had cracked something open in Nathan. Not just anger, but a fear rooted in his past, in the nights he'd hidden from his father's rage, the shame of failing to protect his wife Emily from cancer, the silence that had driven his son Jacob away. He needed to act to protect Chance, to prove he wasn't the man who let everything slip through his fingers. He planned to visit Tessa at Monroe Pet Haven, to tell her about Vince, to ask for help reporting him, but the weight of it all kept him rooted, his coffee cold in its mug. Chance stirred, lifting his head to watch Nathan, a soft whine escaping, as if to say, "You're not alone." Nathan reached out his hand, hovering near the dog's back, not touching the scars, just offering presence, and Chance leaned into it, his warmth a quiet anchor. The house was still, the radiator's hum, the only sound, until 3 soft knocks broke, the silence sharp and unexpected. Nathan froze, his pulse quickening, Chance's ears perking, as he gave a low, cautious bark. Nathan stood, his boots heavy on the floorboards, and opened the door to find a young man, tall and lean, his shaggy brown hair tucked under a knit beanie, his grey eyes so like Nathan's, but guarded, his lips pressed into a line of practiced detachment. A worn backpack hung over one shoulder, his coat too thin for the weather, its cuffs frayed. "Jacob," Nathan said, his voice catching the name a wound. He hadn't spoken in years. "Hey," the young man replied, his gaze flicking past Nathan into the house. "Got your address from Aunt Marie, said you were still here." Jacob was 20 now, no longer the boy who'd sat on the porch waiting for Emily to come home from chemo, his frame stretched thin like he'd grown too fast, his posture stiff with the defiance Nathan remembered from their last fight after the funeral, when Jacob had shouted, "You let her die," and walked away. They stood in silence, the air thick with unspoken years, Nathan's throat tight with a mix of hope and dread. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. Jacob hesitated, then entered, the warmth of the room faint but better than the fog outside. His eyes landed on Chance, curled by the radiator, and his guarded expression softened. "Is that yours?" he asked, his voice quieter. "His name's Chance," Nathan said. "Found him behind the school a couple weeks ago. Nearly gone." Jacob crouched, keeping his distance, his hands loose as if unsure what to do. "He looks rough." "He's been through hell," Nathan said, "but he's fighting." Jacob's gaze lingered on Chance, the dog sniffing the air, then relaxing his tail, giving a faint twitch. "Kinda like you, huh?" Jacob said, the words half a question, half a challenge. Nathan didn't answer, his chest aching with the truth of it. "You still working nights?" Jacob asked, breaking the silence. "Yeah," Nathan said, still alone. "Not exactly," he added, nodding toward Chance. The quiet stretched heavy with things neither knew how to say until Jacob spoke. His voice strained. "I used to think you didn't care when Mom died. You just kept working, mopping floors like nothing mattered. I thought if you'd tried harder, she'd still be here." Nathan's head snapped up, his eyes burning. "I tried, Jacob," the words raw. "I worked every shift. Sold the car, begged doctors for help, but it was stage 4. Nothing was enough." Jacob nodded, his eyes fixed on Chance. "I didn't know that. Then I was just angry." Nathan sat by the couch, his hands heavy on his knees. "I didn't tell you. I should have." They sat in silence, Chance stirring with a soft moan, his head lifting to sniff Jacob's hand. Jacob held still, letting the dog nudge him. "He trusts you," Jacob said, a faint smile breaking through. Nathan's lips twitched, trying to earn it. The moment felt fragile, like a bridge built on splintered wood, but it held. Nathan offered Jacob the couch for the night, pulling out a spare blanket and a pillow worn thin. Jacob accepted with a nod, unpacking a few things from his backpack. A book, a folded shirt, signs he might stay a while. Nathan told him about Vince, the alley, the threat to take Chance, his voice steady, but his hands shaking. Jacob listened, his jaw tight. "He sounds like trouble. You gonna report him?" "Going to the vet tomorrow," Nathan said. "She'll know what to do." Jacob nodded, his eyes on Chance, who'd settled closer to him now, his breathing calm. That evening they ate bread and broth, Nathan scraping together what little he had, Chance watching from his blanket, his presence a quiet glue binding father and son. Across the street, Clara Hensley saw the stranger arrive, her sharp eyes noting the backpack, the hesitant steps, and she whispered a prayer for Nathan's family, whatever it was now. Nathan lay awake that night, his mind a tangle of Vince's threats and Jacob's return, but Chance's steady breaths by the radiator were a reminder that broken things could mend. He'd fight for Chance, for Jacob, for the chance to be more than his failures. The Toledo fog lingered into midday, wrapping Elmwood Avenue in a grey veil that muted the clatter of the waking city, the air sharp with the scent of wet asphalt and dying leaves. Inside Nathan Carver's bungalow at number 417, the morning was a fragile truce between father and son, the walls creaking under the weight of years unspoken. Nathan sat at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a chipped mug of weak coffee, his eyes tracing Chance, the golden retriever who lay on his blanket by the radiator. His scars less vivid now, his fur softer, but his body still tensing at the squeak of a floorboard. Jacob, Nathan's estranged son, now 20, sprawled on the couch, his backpack open beside him, his grey eyes flicking between his father and the dog who'd become their silent mediator. The previous night's reunion had been raw, Jacob's anger over his mother Emily's death softened by time, but not gone, his presence in the house both a wound and a hope. Nathan had shared the encounter with Vince Harlow, the tattooed man who claimed Chance's property, his threats echoing in the alley like a storm waiting to break. Jacob had listened, his jaw tight, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm, promising to go with Nathan to Monroe Pet Haven to tell Tessa Quinn, the vet who'd first tended Chance. Nathan felt the weight of Vince's words, property by law, a reminder of his own powerlessness, his past failures to protect Emily, to keep Jacob close. But Chance's steady gaze grounded him, a reminder that he was fighting now. The dog had eaten well that morning, Clara's chicken mixed with oats, his tail wagging more freely, a sign of trust that made Nathan's chest ache with quiet pride. They set out for the clinic mid-morning, Nathan pushing Chance in the laundry basket. Nestled in the rusted shopping cart, Jacob walking beside him, his beanie pulled low, his hands stuffed in his thin coat. The streets were slick, the fog swallowing the edges of Toledo's tired buildings, the pawn shop's neon sign buzzing faintly. At Monroe Pet Haven, the waiting room was quieter today, a single cat meowing in a carrier, the air warm with the smell of disinfectant. Tessa greeted them, her chestnut curls tied back, her eyes sharpening, as she saw Nathan's tense face and the stranger beside him. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, crouching by Chance, who thumped his tail weakly. Nathan introduced Jacob, his voice catching. "My son just got back in town," then told her about Vince, the green truck, the tattoos, the claim that Chance was his trained for illegal fights. Tessa's face darkened, her fingers pausing over Chance's. "Scars, I know the name," she said. "Vince Harlow. He's been on our radar, suspected of running dogfights in warehouses, out by the docks, never enough proof to stick." She checked Chance's wounds, nodding at his progress, then stood, her voice low. "I've got something you need to see." In her cramped office, Tessa opened a laptop, its screen flickering with grainy footage sent by a rescue network volunteer. The video was old 2, maybe 3 years. The timestamp faded, but the setting was clear. A cement-floored warehouse, crates stacked in rows, shadows moving behind wire fencing. Then Chance appeared younger, his golden fur fuller but his eyes wide with terror, dragged by a choke chain, his paws scrabbling on the floor. A man, Vince, unmistakable, his tattoos flashing under harsh lights, shouted commands, his voice a snarl. Chance hesitated, cowering, and Vince swung a looped cord over a rafter, yanking it tight to hoist the dog onto his hind legs, his body twisting in pain. A voice off-screen praised the method: total submission. No bark, no bite, just obedience. Nathan's stomach churned, his fists clenching, Jacob's breath hitching beside him. Chance, still in the basket, whimpered at the sound of Vince's voice, his body curling tighter, as if the memory lived in his bones. Tessa slammed the laptop shut, her eyes blazing. "I've been sitting on this, waiting for something to tie it to him. This is enough to start, but the police need more chain of custody proof. It's recent." Nathan swallowed, his voice hoarse. "What do? We do." Tessa leaned forward. "We build a case. I've got a friend in animal control. She'll watch for Vince's truck. Any reports tied to him, we keep Chance safe, and we wait." Jacob spoke up, his voice sharp. What if he comes for him again? Tessa met his gaze. Then we're ready. We document everything. Nathan nodded, his heart heavy, but his resolve hardening. Back home, the fog had thickened, the bungalow's windows fogged. With condensation, Chance settling by the radiator, his eyes following Nathan and Jacob as they sat in silence. Nathan noticed something new. Chance had started sitting by the front door each evening, his body alert, his bark low and short, when footsteps passed outside. Not fear, not aggression, but a claim. This is home. I'm here. It was a shift from victim to guardian, a mirror to Nathan's own stirring courage. Jacob broke the quiet. You think they'll get him? Nathan looked at Chance. I think we have to try. The dog's presence filled the room, a reminder that broken things could fight back. Across the street, Clara Hensley watched the pair return, her sharp eyes catching Jacob's slouch, Nathan's hunched shoulders, and she whispered a prayer for strength. That night, Nathan and Jacob ate bread and broth. Chance curled between them, his warmth a bridge across their fractured years. Nathan lay awake, his mind a tangle of Vince's cruelty and Jacob's tentative trust, but Chance's steady breaths were a promise that they could face what came next together. The Toledo twilight hung heavy over Elmwood Avenue, the fog thinning to reveal a sky bruised with clouds, the cold snapping at exposed skin as Nathan Carver walked Chance along the cracked sidewalks near number 417, his bungalow, a dim beacon in the gathering dark. The golden retriever moved with a stronger gait now, his scars fading to thin lines, his fur catching the streetlight's glow, but his one good eye stayed alert, darting to shadows, as if Vince Harlow's threat lingered in every corner. It had been 2 weeks since Nathan found Chance behind the school dumpster, 2 weeks of Tessa's care at Monroe Pet Haven, of Clara's quiet gifts of food and blankets, of Jacob's unexpected return, stitching a fragile bond between father and son. The grainy footage Tessa had shown them, Vince dragging a younger Chance by a choke chain in a warehouse, had burned itself into Nathan's mind, fueling a resolve to protect the dog at all costs. Jacob, now 20, slept on the couch, his presence a weight Nathan both cherished and feared, unsure if he could mend the years lost to grief and blame over Emily's death. Nathan kept Chance close on these walks, the makeshift leash taut, his bad arm aching under his coat, his boots scuffing the pavement. Tonight they looped toward the corner laundromat, its neon sign flickering the alley behind it, a narrow throat, far darkness. Nathan's pulse quickened, memories of Vince's green truck and tattooed sneer surfacing, but he pushed forward, Chance's steady steps, a reminder of why he couldn't falter. Then he saw it parked crookedly against the curb, its chipped green paint unmistakable. One headlight taped the steel crate in the bed, glinting like a cage for ghosts. Chance stiffened, his growl low and guttural, his body pressing against Nathan's leg as the truck's door slammed open. Vince Harlow stepped out, his jacket dirtier now, his balding head gleaming under the street lamp, a toothpick rolling between. Yellowed teeth, his grin a blade. Well, look at this, he said, his voice thick with mock surprise. My dog's still kicking. Thought you'd have given up by now, janitor. Nathan's heart pounded, his throat dry, but he squared his shoulders. Chances, growl a steady hum beside him. He's not yours, Nathan said, his voice calm but edged with steel. Vince laughed, pulling a folded paper from his pocket, waving it like a flag. This says different certificate of ownership, chipped and registered in my name. Legally mine. Nathan's jaw clenched, the paper a taunt, a reminder of his own powerlessness. His years of scraping by, unable to fight systems bigger than him. After what you did to him, you think a paper matters, Nathan said. Vince stepped closer, his breath sour. You don't get it. Dogs don't choose, they obey or they break. You're just delaying the inevitable. Nathan's fear surged, memories of his father's fists, of Emily's hospital bed, of Jacob's accusing eyes. But Chance's presence anchored him, the dog's growl louder now, his body tense but not cowering. Unknown to Vince, Jacob had followed. Nathan sensing trouble after their talk about Vince's threats, his phone raised from behind a dumpster, its camera capturing every word, every sneer. Jacob's hands shook, but he held steady, his breath silent, his resolve hardened by the dog who'd softened his anger. Nathan met Vince's gaze. You're not taking him. If you come near him again, I'll make sure everyone knows what you are. Vince's grin twisted, his eyes narrowing. "You threatening me? You're nothing, just a mop pusher with a mutt." Nathan knelt beside Chance, his hand gentle on the dog's collar. No, but the truth might. Chance barked sharp and high, his front legs braced as if ready to lunge. Vince's smirk faltering for a split second. "Get out." Nathan said, "I won't say it again." Vince stared, his jaw working, then spit to the side. "You'll regret this," he said. Climbing into his truck, the engine roaring as he sped off, the taillights swallowed by the dark. Nathan stood frozen, Chance trembling but standing firm, the alley silent except for their breaths. Jacob emerged, his phone still in hand, his face pale but determined. "Got it all," he said. "Audio, video, plate number, the whole threat." Nathan's eyes widened. "You were there?" Jacob nodded, had a feeling guys like him don't quit. They hurried home, the fog closing in. Chance limping but alert, his nose brushing Nathan's hand. At number 417, Nathan sank into the couch, Chance curling by the radiator. Jacob pacing as he played the video, the sound of Vince's voice making the dog whimper. "We need to get this to Tessa. Nathan said she'll know who to trust." Jacob nodded. Guys like him think they're untouchable, but this is proof. That evening they met Tessa outside the clinic, her wool coat too big for her frame, her cheeks red from the cold. She watched the video, her lips thinning with every second. "This matches the warehouse footage," she said. "It's enough to file a report. I know an officer, Sarah Klein, she handles cruelty cases. I'll send this to her tonight." Nathan's chest tightened. "Will it stick?" Tessa's eyes were fierce. "It's a start. If he tries anything else, we'll have more. They'll watch him now." Nathan nodded, relief mixing with fear, the fight no longer just his, but shared. Back home, Chance sat by the door, his new habit of guarding. The house, his bark low and steady, when a neighbor passed a claim of home that made the bungalow feel alive. Across the street, Clara Hensley saw the trio return her prayers, a whisper for their courage. Nathan and Jacob sat in silence, Chance between them, the dog's warmth, a reminder that they were building something stronger than fear, a family forged in the act of saving one broken soul. The Toledo morning broke with a fragile clarity, the fog lifting to reveal a sky of pale blue, the cold air biting but carrying a hint of sunlight that gleamed on the wet roofs of Elmwood Avenue. Nathan Carver stood on the porch of his bungalow at number 417, his breath fogging as he watched Chance, the golden retriever, sniff the frost-kissed grass, his scars now faint silver lines, his gait steadier, his tail wagging with a cautious joy that warmed Nathan's weary heart. 3 weeks had passed since he'd found Chance behind the school dumpster. 3 weeks of Tessa's veterinary care, of Jacob's return, bridging their fractured past, of Vince Harlow's threats looming like a storm cloud. The video Jacob recorded of Vince's second confrontation, paired with Tessa's warehouse footage, had been sent to Officer Sarah Klein, a sharp-eyed woman who promised to monitor Vince's movements. Nathan felt a flicker of hope, but the fear lingered, Vince's claim of ownership, a shadow over their fragile peace. Jacob, now a fixture in the house, slept on the couch, his backpack unpacked, his guitar leaning against the wall, a sign he might stay. Chance had become their center, his quiet strength pulling father and son closer, his new habit of sitting by the door, barking softly at passers-by, a declaration of home. Nathan's days were still lean, his janitor's paycheck stretched thin, but Clara Hensley's gifts of food, unseasoned meat and bread, kept Chance fed and Nathan grateful. That morning, Nathan noticed something off. Clara's porch light was on her curtains, drawn her roses untended for 2 days, unusual for a woman who missed nothing. He'd meant to check on her, but the rush of work and Vince's threats had distracted him. Now as he walked Chance past her house at number 415, the dog tugged toward her gate, his nose twitching, ears forward, a low whine rising in his throat. Nathan frowned, his stomach knotting. Clara, he called, knocking on her door, no answer. Chance barked once sharp and loud, then again, his paw scraping at the door, his body tense, not fearful but urgent. Nathan's heart raced, memories of finding Chance, broken in the alley, flashing in his mind. He fumbled for the spare key Clara had given him months ago for emergencies. "Just in case I fall, or you get nosy," she'd said with a rare smile. The key turned the door creaking open to a kitchen lit by a single bulb, the air heavy with the smell of something scorched. Nathan stepped inside, Chance at his heels, the dog's nose low, his whine louder now. Then Nathan saw her, Clara, sprawled on the linoleum near the stove, her grey hair loose, one hand stretched toward a spilled pot of water, her face pale, her breathing faint. Nathan dropped to his knees, his hands shaking as he checked her pulse weak. But there, her skin cool but not cold. "Clara," he whispered, no response. Chance barked again, sharp and insistent, his nose nudging Clara's hand as if to wake her. Nathan grabbed the phone on the counter, his fingers clumsy as he dialed emergency services, his voice steady but tight. "Woman down, possible stroke, 415 Elmwood Avenue. Hurry." The operator promised help within minutes, Nathan kneeling beside Clara, his hand on her shoulder, talking softly. "You're gonna be okay, we found you, hold on." Chance sat close, his eyes flicking between Clara and the door, his tail still a silent sentinel. Paramedics arrived in a blaze of sirens, a tall woman with short blonde hair named Lisa, leading the team, her movements quick but calm. She checked Clara's vitals, her partner. Hooking up a monitor. "Mild stroke," Lisa said, "likely recent. You got here just in time. Another hour and she might not have made it." Nathan's throat tightened, his eyes burning as they lifted Clara onto a stretcher, her breathing steadier now, an oxygen mask over her face. Chance barked once, not scared, not sad, but a clear note. "We see you, you're not alone." As they wheeled Clara out, Lisa glanced at Chance. "Good dog," she said, "he saved her." Nathan nodded, his hand resting on Chance's head, pride and relief mixing in his chest. Jacob met them at the hospital, having followed after Nathan's frantic call, his face pale but his eyes steady as they waited for news. Clara was stable, the doctor said, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes. "She'll need rehab, but she's tough, you caught it early." Nathan exhaled, his body sagging, Jacob's hand briefly on his shoulder, a silent "we did this." Back home, the bungalow felt emptier without Clara's sharp gaze across the street, but Chance's presence filled the space, his warmth by the radiator, a reminder of his quiet heroism. Nathan and Jacob sat in silence, eating bread and broth. Chance curled between them, his eyes brighter now, his tail wagging at the clink of a spoon. Jacob broke the quiet. "He's something else, isn't he? Saved her like he's saving us." Nathan's lips twitched, a rare smile. Sometimes the broken ones fight hardest. Across the street, Clara's porch light stayed on a promise she'd return. Nathan thought of Vince, of the fight still ahead, but Chance's steady breaths grounded him. The dog had sensed Clara's danger, had refused to let her fade, just as he'd refused to break under Vince's cruelty. Nathan's resolve hardened. He'd protect Chance, protect this home, this family they were building. The night settled over Toledo, the stars faint but piercing the fog, and Nathan knew whatever came next, they'd face it together. The Toledo dawn spilled over Elmwood Avenue with a hesitant glow, the first clear day in weeks, painting the cracked sidewalks with sunlight that softened the city's weary edges. Nathan Carver stood at the kitchen window of number 417, his bungalow a quiet haven, where Chance the golden retriever slept on his blanket by the radiator, his golden fur gleaming now, his scars mere whispers of the cruelty he'd endured. 4 weeks had passed since Nathan found Chance broken behind the school dumpster, 4 weeks of Tessa's healing hands at Monroe Pet Haven, of Jacob's return, mending their fractured bond, of Clara's near loss, saved by Chance's insistent bark. The weight of Vince Harlow's threats had hung heavy, his green truck a spectre in Nathan's mind, but the evidence, Jacob's video of Vince's confrontation, paired with Tessa's warehouse footage, had shifted the tide. Officer Sarah Klein had taken the files, her sharp eyes promising action, and 2 days ago she'd called Tessa, with news a raid was planned on a warehouse near the docks, where Vince was suspected of running his illegal dogfights. Nathan felt a mix of hope and dread, his janitor's life of mopping floors at Lincoln Middle School, unchanged, but his heart transformed by Chance's trust, Jacob's presence, Clara's survival. He fed Chance a mix of kibble and Clara's chicken, the dog's tail wagging freely now, his one good eye bright, with a spark that mirrored Nathan's own stirring courage. Jacob sat at the table, flipping through a local paper, his guitar case open, a sign he was settling in his enrollment in a welding program marking a new start. The bungalow was still sparse, the fridge near empty, but it felt alive, Chance's habit of guarding the door, his low bark at passing shadows a claim of home. That morning, Tessa arrived unannounced, her coat dusted with frost, her eyes alight with news. It's done. She said Sarah's team hit the warehouse last night. They got him. Nathan's breath caught Jacob leaning forward as Tessa explained the raid had uncovered a grim scene. Rusted cages, hay-strewn floors, 3 emaciated dogs chained to walls, their ribs stark, their water bowls green with neglect. Vince was there barking orders to a lackey when police stormed in, his curses echoing as cuffs snapped on his wrists. The evidence was overwhelming. Jacob's video tying Vince to Chance Tessa's footage, showing his cruelty, a paper trail of forged chip registrations and veterinary neglect sealing his fate. He was arrested on multiple charges: animal cruelty, illegal gambling, attempted theft of Chance, with more to come as the dogs were examined. Nathan sank onto the couch, Chance nudging his hand, his warmth a steady anchor. Jacob's jaw was tight, relief mixing with anger. He won't hurt him again, right? Tessa nodded. Not if Sarah has her say. This could break his operation for good. The news spread fast, local reporters descending on the story, a community victory spun with headlines of hope. Sarah gave a brief interview, her blue slacks crisp, her voice calm but firm. This case could have slipped through, but a few brave people and one loyal dog made the difference. They aired a clip of Nathan and Chance from a quiet moment at the clinic. The dog's head in Nathan's lap. Viewers calling in with donations, some offering to adopt Chance, though Nathan gently declined. At Lincoln Middle School, the principal, Mr. Ellison, called Nathan into his office, a rare summons for a man who moved through the halls unseen. A stern man in his 60s with a soft voice, he folded his hands. "You've done something remarkable, Mr. Carver. This school, this town, we're proud." He slid a white envelope across the desk. A community honor grant, modest but enough to cover a month's rent or Chance's food. Nathan blinked twice, his throat tight. "Thank you, sir," he said, pocketing the check, his first gift in years. Back home, the day unfolded in gentle waves, Jacob strumming his guitar, the notes hesitant but warm. Tessa lingering to check Chance, her laugh filling the room as the dog flopped beside her. Nathan watched them, his son's eyes lingering on Tessa's quick smile, a spark of something new. Chance played for the first time, chasing a knotted rag. Jacob tossed, his movements clumsy but joyful, his bark bright and free. Nathan's heart swelled, the dog, who'd once trembled in an alley, now bounding with life. Across the street, Clara's porch light burned, though she was still in rehab, her neighbor tending her roses, a promise of her return. Nathan sat with Chance that evening, the dog's head on his knee, the bungalow quiet, but no longer hollow. The raid had closed a chapter, Vince's arrest, a victory for every scar Chance bore. But Nathan knew the real triumph was here, in the trust between him and Jacob, in Tessa's fierce alliance, in Clara's survival. He thought of his past, his father's violence, Emily's loss, Jacob's absence, and saw them not as failures but as steps to this moment where he'd chosen to fight for something fragile. Chance sighed, his warmth a reminder that broken things could heal, could protect, could love. The stars peeked through the clouds, Nathan whispering, "You did, good boy, you saved us all." The fight had been won, but the journey wasn't over, and Nathan felt ready for whatever came next, a man no longer defined by what he'd lost but by what he'd found. The Toledo spring crept into Elmwood Avenue. With a tentative warmth, the March sun coaxing buds from barren trees and melting the last frost from the sidewalks, where Nathan Carver's bungalow at number 417 stood freshly painted, its green siding no longer peeling thanks to a weekend of work with Jacob. Inside, the house hummed with a quiet vitality. Chance the golden retriever sprawled by the radiator, his scars now faint, his fur a rich gold, his one good eye bright with a contentment that mirrored the slow healing of the man who'd saved him. 5 weeks had passed since Nathan found Chance broken in the alley. 5 weeks since Vince Harlow's arrest in the warehouse raid, a victory that had rippled through Toledo's tired streets. The news had faded, but its impact lingered, Jacob staying. On the couch, his welding program underway, his guitar, a constant hum in the evenings. Tessa's visits now a fixture, her veterinary supplies joined by stories and laughter, Clara's recovery progressing in rehab, her letters sharp but warm. Nathan's janitor shifts at Lincoln Middle School remained grueling, his bad arm aching, but the community honor grant had eased the strain, his fridge stocked with more than bread and mustard, Chance's kibble a priority. The dog was transformed. no longer flinching at sudden moves, his tail wagging freely his nightly vigil by the door, a proud bark at passing shadows, a claim of home that filled the bungalow with life. Nathan stood in the kitchen, stirring a pot of stew, a rare luxury made. With Clara's recipe, his eyes on Jacob, who sat restringing his guitar, his movements precise, his beanie discarded, revealing hair combed for once. Jacob had changed since the raid, his defiance softening his laughter quicker, especially when Tessa was around, her shoes now a permanent fixture by the door, her sketchbook often open to drawings of Chance. The dog adored her, flopping beside her, with a sigh nudging her hand for scratches, his trust a bridge between the three. Nathan watched them one evening on the porch, Jacob tuning his guitar, Tessa sketching Chance, who chased a moth in the grass, his clumsy bounds a far cry from the trembling creature of November. Tessa laughed at something Jacob said, her eyes meeting his. "You're not what I expected," she said, her tone warm. Jacob grinned. "I get that a lot." His fingers strumming a soft chord neither recognized but all felt. Nathan sipped his coffee, a rare smile tugging at his lips, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The porch was new too, its warped boards, replaced with Jacob's help, a symbol of their rebuilding, not just wood but trust. Jacob spoke more now of Emily's laugh, of his years drifting, of his hope to weld sculptures someday, not just car parts. Nathan listened, his silence no longer heavy, but open, sharing stories of his carpentry days, of Emily's love for sunflowers, a tentative bridge across their lost years. One afternoon, Tessa brought a vet update. Chance's health was solid, his scars. "No barrier to a long life," she said, "but keep him active, he's got a lot of love to give." Jacob tossed a ball, Chance fetching it with a joyful bark, his energy infectious. Nathan joined in, his bad arms stiff but willing, the three laughing as Chance tumbled in the grass, a family forming in the spaces where pain had once lived. Clara sent a letter that week, her handwriting shaky but firm. "I'm walking with a cane now, be home soon. Tell that dog he's got my thanks." Nathan read it aloud, Chance's ears perking as if he understood Jacob joking. "He's going to demand a medal." The community had noticed too, Lena Torres, the art teacher, stopping Nathan at school with a box of old towels for Chance. "You're a hero, Mr. Carver," she said, and Nathan shook his head. "It's him, not me." The school kids started waving at him in the halls, a small shift, but enough to make him stand taller. At home, Nathan repaired more than the porch. He fixed a leaking faucet, patched a wall, each task a reclaiming of the carpenter he'd been. Jacob helped, his welding skills sharpening their banter easy now, like they'd never been apart. Tessa's visits grew longer, her sketches piling up, one framed on the wall, Chance mid-leap, a testament to his joy. Nathan saw the spark between her and Jacob, the way Jacob stood straighter when she laughed, the way Tessa's eyes lingered on his calloused hands. He said nothing, but felt a quiet pride, his son finding something to hold on to. Chance tied them, all his presence a reminder that healing wasn't just surviving but thriving. The dog slept closer to Nathan now, his head on Nathan's knee during quiet evenings, his warmth a constant, no longer a rescue, but a partner. Nathan thought of past his father's violence, Emily's loss, Jacob's absence, and saw them as shadows fading in the light of what they'd built. Across the street, Clara's roses bloomed under a neighbor's care, her porch light a beacon for her return. Nathan sat on the porch one night, Chance beside him, Jacob and Tessa, inside their laughter spilling through the open window. The stars were clear, the air soft with spring, and Nathan whispered to Chance, "We're whole now, boy, because of you." The dog sighed, leaning into him, and Nathan knew this was redemption, not loud or grand, but woven in small acts of love. The Toledo spring bloomed fully over Elmwood Avenue by late April, the sun warming the cracked sidewalks, where dandelions pushed through with stubborn hope, the air sweet with lilac and fresh-cut grass, a far cry from the November rains that had once drowned the city in grey. Nathan Carver sat on the newly built porch of his bungalow at number 417, his hands cradling a thermos of coffee, the green siding of the house vibrant under Jacob's careful painting, the iron gate no longer rusted, but gleaming with a fresh coat of black. Chance the golden retriever lay at his feet, his head resting on Nathan's boot, his fur a rich gold, his scars now barely visible, his one good eye bright, with a peace that mirrored the quiet joy in Nathan's heart. 6 weeks had passed since Nathan found Chance trembling behind the school dumpster. 6 weeks since Vince Harlow's arrest in the warehouse raid had freed 3 other dogs and closed a chapter of cruelty. The ripples of that victory had reshaped Nathan's world. Jacob's permanent stay, his welding program, thriving, Tessa's constant presence, her laughter, a fixture in the house, Clara's return from rehab, her sharp wit intact. Nathan's janitor. Shifts at Lincoln Middle School were still grueling his bad arm a dull ache, but the community honor grant and small donations from the news story had eased the strain. His fridge stocked with meat and vegetables, Chance's kibble a steady expense. He paid gladly. The dog was no longer a rescue, but a guardian, his nightly vigil by the door. A proud bark at passing shadows, a claim of home that made the bungalow a sanctuary. Jacob sat on the porch steps, strumming his guitar, the chords soft and sure, his beanie. Gone his hair combed, a sign of the confidence he'd found in his work, and in Tessa's warm glances. Tessa herself perched on a chair, her sketchbook open, capturing Chance mid-yawn, her curls loose, her smile easy, as she teased Jacob about his off-key notes. Clara joined them, hobbling across the street with a cane, her wool sweater bright her arms, bearing a loaf of homemade bread still warm from the oven. "I'm not dead yet," she said gruffly, "so don't eat this all at once." Nathan laughed, a sound rare and deep, his heart full with the sight of this makeshift family, forged in the fire of saving one broken soul. The porch was their gathering place now, its boards sanded smooth by Nathan and Jacob's hands, a symbol of their rebuilt trust, each nail a promise to stay. Chance bounded to Clara, his tail wagging like a metronome, his nose nudging her hand as she scratched his ears. "You're still my hero," she said, her voice softer than usual. Clara had come home a week ago, her stroke a fading memory, her roses blooming, again under her fierce care, her porch light burning as a beacon of resilience. Nathan watched her settle into a chair, her presence grounding the moment like a root in good soil. He thought of the journey that had brought them here, finding Chance bloodied and trembling, his own life a shadow of loss, his father's violence, Emily's death, Jacob's absence, each a weight he'd carried alone. Saving Chance had been a reckless act, no money, no plan, just a heart that couldn't walk away, and it had changed everything. Jacob's return had cracked open old wounds, but their shared fight for Chance had healed them. Late-night talks about Emily's sunflower garden, about Jacob's dreams of welding art, about Nathan's carpentry days, rebuilding a bond stronger than before. Tessa's role had grown beyond ally, her sketches of Chance now framed on the walls, her laughter a melody that drew Jacob out of his shell, his eyes lingering on her with a shy hope Nathan recognized from his own youth. Tessa caught Nathan's gaze and grinned. "You're quiet today, old man. What's on your mind?" Nathan smiled, shaking his head. "Just grateful, that's all." Clara snorted. "Grateful's a start, but you've earned this, don't forget it." Jacob strummed a chord. "You're getting soft, Clara." And she swatted his arm with her cane. "Watch it, kid, or I'll bake you a pie with salt instead of sugar." They laughed, the sound carrying down the street, where neighbors waved, kids on bikes slowing to pet Chance, who soaked up the attention with a regal tilt of his head. The community had shifted too. Lena Torres at the school slipping Nathan extra soap for Chance. The kids drawing pictures of the dog taped to his mop closet, the principal nodding in quiet respect. Nathan wasn't invisible anymore. His act of compassion, a ripple that touched lives he'd never known. Chance chased a butterfly across the yard, his bound strong, his bark bright, a far cry from the creature who'd surrendered in the alley. Nathan watched him, pride swelling his own scars, the broken arm, the years of grief fading in the light of this new beginning. He thought of Emily, how she'd loved dogs, how she'd have smiled at Chance's antics, and felt her presence in the warmth of this moment, not gone, but woven into it. Jacob set his guitar aside, helping Clara to her chair, his gentleness a mirror to Nathan's own, with Chance a legacy of care passed down. Tessa finished her sketch, holding it up. Chance mid-leap, his joy immortalized, and Jacob leaned close, his shoulder brushing hers. "You're good at this," he said, his voice low. She blushed, returning to her pencil, but her smile lingered. Nathan sipped his coffee, the thermos warm in his hands, his eyes on the street where life moved on. Kids shouting, a dog barking in the distance. The world no longer cold and unkind, but alive with possibility. Clara broke the silence. "You know, Nathan, you didn't just save him, he saved you right back." Nathan nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah, he did." Chance returned, dropping a stick at Nathan's feet, his tail wagging an invitation to play. Nathan tossed it, the dog bounding after it, and the group laughed. Clara clapping her hands, Jacob whistling. The sun dipped low, bathing Elmwood Avenue in gold, the stars waiting to emerge, and Nathan felt whole, not because the pain was gone, but because it had led him here. He whispered to Chance, "Good boy, you made us a family." And the dog leaned into his side, his warmth a promise that no soul was too broken to mend. The porch light flickered on Clara's roses, glowed across the street, and Nathan knew this was redemption. A miracle not of thunder, but of quiet love, of second chances, of a dog who'd chosen to live, and a man who'd chosen to fight.